And then what we do is we try and collect and share best practices, establish peer-to-peer exchanges, and promote a network that allows a more efficient exchange of information. And we do this through three key strategies: political action and engagement, technical assistance and capacity building, and economics, finance, and investment. And I really sit in that economics, finance, and investment seat, where we seek to attract and scale financial investments in nature-based solutions by increasing literacy of conservation finance approaches, enhancing bankability of projects, and replicating and scaling novel financing approaches, some of which I will share with you today. In terms of Latin America and the Caribbean, I'm so excited because there's a huge opportunity, and some things that present themselves as challenges are actually a space in which we can really transition to a new green economy. First and foremost is probably the infrastructure gap in Latin America. By 2030, Latin America and the Caribbean will need to invest upwards of 2.2 trillion in the water and sanitation, energy, and telecommunications sectors to expand and maintain the infrastructure necessary to meet the SDGs. Of this total, 59% will need to be allocated to investments for new infrastructure. And this says to me, this is actually an opportunity, because each of these infrastructure sectors can have nature incorporated into them to enhance and build resilience and offer some significant cost savings. In addition to that, this is a really special place to focus on where we can pilot some of these innovative financing mechanisms, given the climate vulnerability in the region. This is across the globe, but specifically in Latin America and the Caribbean, we're seeing these climate-induced events that have caused significant disruptions to business as usual. The increased frequency and magnitude of droughts, fires, floods, and tropical storms, and those are having social and economic impacts that increase inequality, mass migration, food and water insecurity, and of course, the associated economic losses, which makes it hard for governments to recover and provide additional funding towards growth. The good news is, and I think you've been learning this throughout the whole conference, is that nature-based solutions actually are key to both addressing climate change and green development. And we define nature-based solutions as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that achieve tangible development outcomes for human health, well-being, and biodiversity. So when I refer to NBS, I mean to think of it as an infrastructure solution, either on its own or in combination with traditional infrastructure. And NBS offers a tremendous untapped opportunity to build resilience into economic recovery and infrastructure investments. And there is a robust evidence base that demonstrates that NBS has this triple dividend. First, resilience. As I'm sure you all have learned, they help countries improve infrastructure service delivery and avoid losses from climate impacts, saving countries billions of dollars each year. There's significant economic gains that nature can help provide. We've done a study that investments in natural capital can actually create almost twice as many jobs per $1 million spent as traditional industries, including coal and oil and gas. And this is done through job creation, tourism, promoting social equity. And then finally, the co-benefits. As we all have noted, NBS can provide cleaner air, and they also protect human health and biodiversity. And these provide important societal benefits alongside. And then critically, NBS can provide about 1/3 of the climate mitigation needed between now and 2030 to keep global warming below 2 degrees. So I think of nature-based solutions as an opportunity to rethink how we do our public budgets, not only to deliver the resilience benefits, but also the long-term economic gains that can be provided, and the greater inclusivity in terms of social structure. The other good news is that we're seeing an ever-increasing amount of capital from the private sector earmarked for nature and/or climate. And this growing private sector capital is greatly needed in order for us to diversify and expand the available resources to invest in addressing climate change and the green transition. As we all know, public commitments right now fall far short of being able to meet that infrastructure gap challenge. Furthermore, in partnership with the IDB, WRI, and we conducted a study to evaluate the status and trends of NBS projects in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we identified over 156 projects, with the majority in Mexico and Brazil. This study just demonstrates that there is great potential here with many projects across the whole geographies. But the challenge we found is that most of these are in the grant and donor-based stage, and small scale. So really, how do we transition from business as usual? And we need to do this by changing the way we invest and value nature. Often these MBS projects were financed by public and philanthropic funds. They are small scale, impact driven, and have unproven business cases to unlock sort of that capital finance from private sectors. In addition, it wasn't enough money. These small scale projects are less than $5 million. As many of you may know, infrastructure investors, institutional investors, private sector are looking for deal sizes greater than 25 million. And so if we continue on this path of just funding nature through the providence of philanthropic and government spaces, we'll never be able to really achieve scale and the pace necessary. So this is where we like to think about the sourcing and sequencing of financing in order to get these nature and climate investments to be an institutional or routine investment. And so in order to do that, we need to move from grant funding and public funds towards concessional capital and to unlock private capital. So some of the examples I'm going to talk through today broach this blending of these resources, all of which with the aim to get to where investing in nature-based solutions and climate change is routine and basically vanilla, such that these institutional investors are not at all concerned or worried about the investment returns for these types of projects. So how do we do that? We really think through where are the sources of funding and explore ways in which these types of actors can collaborate together to help drive landscape scale investments. So what we have found is elements of success is that if you can get community-led projects to aggregate, we can start to reach that scale size. Also, we can get impact-driven plus the revenue-generating opportunities from many of these different potential beneficiaries of these nature-based and green-gray infrastructure solutions. But to do that, we need new partnerships and proof of concept. So to recap briefly, where we are now in terms of globally, but also specifically to Latin America and the Caribbean, is that we have a limited pipeline of these bankable projects that meet private investor objectives. As you all know, oftentimes these business as usual approaches stymie our ability to incorporate MBS into different project preparation cycles, into decision making, and we have limited resources and capacity in which to do that. The deal sizes are not quite appropriate, and we have limited examples of success. But we have those success examples. So I'm going to jump to a few of these projects that I think are really outstanding, both in the region and globally, that have really evaluated the ways in which we can start at the local level and begin to access these new and different sources of financing. So as many of you know, throughout the Bahamas, hurricanes, tropical storms, and sea level rise intensified by climate change threaten coastal communities and infrastructure. So 1 meter of sea level rise is predicted to place 38% of the country's airports, 90% of its seaports, and 40% of its road networks at risk of flooding. So MBS is recognized as an opportunity here to play a significant role in mitigating these flood effects. And one study found that the strategic management of ecosystems of these mangroves, seagrasses, and coral reefs could reduce the length of shoreline on the island of Andros that is exposed to erosion and flooding by 20%. That's pretty significant. And so using these data and these tools, proving the actual percentage benefit of flood risk reduction, but also the reduction in erosion, IDB and the government of the Bahamas created a RFP process that incorporated nature-based solutions directly into the infrastructure planning. And so this helped unlock a capital loan of $35 million that is going to be amortized over this period of 24 years. But it pays for a green-gray solution here that includes breakwaters and groins as the gray infrastructure side. And it will also provide several upgrades in terms of roads. And the roads were going to be enhanced by vegetation to avoid erosion. And there's a stretch of mangroves in Tidal Creek that are also going to be invested and restored. I think this is a really important component in terms of how nature-based solutions in combination with gray infrastructure can make it vanilla to lenders, but also really achieve the nature-based benefits associated with mangroves and vegetation. Another interesting space, if we move over to Mexico, and I think this is a huge, huge opportunity in terms of incorporating insurance companies into this space as both as reinsurers, but also as experts in risk mitigation, and having the insurance companies be able to value. There's no one better on the market being able to price risk than insurance companies. And so having the insurance companies step in and examine the value of nature for the benefit of communities is an extremely important step. And here in Mexico, this is the first ever insurance policy for nature-based solutions. And as you may know, the coral reefs along Mexico's beach lines serve a really critical role. First, that they underpin the $9 billion tourist industry, and they offer cost-effective storm protection for the pristine beaches and coastline infrastructure. In fact, coral reefs are estimated to reduce storm wave by up to 97%, which significantly reduces on-land impacts, both for humans and infrastructure. So in Quintana Roo, they did a data, TNC performed a historical data, and found that that a 10-year, let's see, how do I say this? Okay, that over a 10-year horizon, the effects of storm events would affect 4,600 people with $63 million in flood damage and other economic losses. And through this evaluation of defining how much money it would cost, they were able to unlock a consistent funding stream from hotel revenue taxes to help set up and pay for this conservation trust fund called the Trust for Coastal Zone Management, Social Development, and Security. They are the ones who bought and paid for this parametric insurance policy, which is the first of its kind to pay out rapidly money after a storm event to restore the coral reefs, such that the coral reefs can be maintained and restored within 60 days of a storm event, and therefore that protection remains in place. And this is critical in terms of thinking how different financing mechanisms can start to pay for these important nature-based solution assets. I don't have too much time, but I'm going to go quickly through this. Another place I want to emphasize is that oftentimes when we talk about climate finance, we're talking about the upfront capital to do projects, but it's equally as important to think through the long-term operating maintenance costs and flexible funding when grant funds or donors switch priorities. And one of the strongest examples out of Latin America and the Caribbean of doing this is Quito's water fund, FONAG, where they created an endowment where they've been able to invest contributions from all the beneficiaries of their restoration activities. And it started at a $20,000 endowment and has now grown to a $21.5 million endowment. And this unlocks for them flexible funding, consistent funding stream, and given that they can utilize these cash flows they could go out and bond on this. They can go out and do other conservation finance mechanisms to reach scale. We mentioned green bonds earlier, and green bonds, I think, are one of the most promising strategies here to unlock private capital, as the instruments are well known by investors, and we're seeing a greater interest in investing in green bonds, as you can see here on the chart. Green bonds are pretty much the same as traditional bonds, except that proceeds must be earmarked towards environmental projects. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, we've actually seen a growth, significant countries are starting to issue them. 13 out of 33 countries have done it. And so as one of the strongest financiers of infrastructure, we believe this is a really promising pathway to finance nature-based solutions in the climate change and climate change investments. So in Arkansas, this is a really interesting example where recognize we're almost out of time here. So I'll go really quickly, but this is a green-gray bond that raised about $31.8 million. A third of that portion goes to watershed protection efforts in terms of acquiring and restoring the forests for the water quality benefits. And then the other 2/3 are paying for gray infrastructure upgrades to increase efficiencies, energy efficiencies across the space. So I will wrap up here with just saying the opportunities here and the strategies, I think that they don't exactly have to be these large scale investments, but rather building up from small. And there's a few of the strategies that I think these examples that I just talked about can demonstrate. One, incorporate MBS into traditional gray infrastructure. Two, it's essential that we start to quantify and value the risk reduction benefits of these nature-based solutions to help spur additional investments. Three, if we can start to think through what are the consistent cash flows we can get from taxes, endowments, tariffs, that's exactly where we need to go in this. And then we can start to blend all those sources together to achieve the scale and pace necessary.